Imagine you're staring at your calendar late at night. There it is again, another deadline. The word alone feels heavy, almost threatening, like something bad will happen if you miss it. Your heart beats faster, your palms sweat, and suddenly that harmless date on the calendar feels like a wall closing in. But have you ever stopped to ask yourself a strange question? Why do we call it a deadline in the first place? It sounds extreme for something as ordinary as submitting homework, finishing a project, or sending an email. After all, we're not talking about life or death, or are we? As it turns out, the word deadline has a surprisingly dark and dramatic history, one that explains exactly why it still carries so much psychological weight today. Let's explore, right here, on History of Simple Things. The term deadline did not originally mean a due date at all. In fact, its earliest recorded use dates back to the American Civil War in the 1860s. During this brutal conflict, prisoners of war were often held in overcrowded camps under harsh conditions. To control prisoners, guards would draw a physical line around the perimeter of the prison camp. This line was called a deadline. If a prisoner crossed or even touched it, they could be shot on sight. There was no warning, no negotiation, and no second chance. The line literally marked the boundary between life and death. In this original sense, a deadline was not a metaphor. It was a very real, very deadly rule. One of the most infamous examples was Andersonville Prison in Georgia, where thousands of Union soldiers were held captive. The deadline there was clearly marked, and prisoners knew the consequences of crossing it. Hunger, disease, and desperation pushed many to the edge, but stepping past that line meant instant death. Over time, stories of these prison camps spread, and the term deadline became known beyond the battlefield. Even after the war ended, the phrase lingered in American language, carrying with it a sense of absolute finality and irreversible consequences. As the years passed, the word began to shift away from its literal meaning. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, deadlines started appearing in newspapers, but with a new twist. Journalists used it to describe the latest possible time an article could be submitted before the printing press started running. Miss that moment, and your story wouldn't make it into the paper. While no one would be shot for crossing this new deadline, the consequences were still serious in a professional sense. You might lose your byline, your reputation, or even your job. The word retained its sense of finality, even as the danger became symbolic rather than physical. This metaphor stuck because it was incredibly effective. A due date sounds polite and flexible. A time limit feels negotiable. But a deadline? That word carries pressure. It implies a point of no return. Once you cross it, something is lost forever. An opportunity, a chance, a version of success. This is why the term spread rapidly beyond journalism into law, education, business, and eventually everyday life. By the mid-20th century, deadlines were everywhere. School assignments, tax filings, work projects, and legal contracts. The word had fully transformed, but its emotional impact remained intact. Psychologically, this is where deadlines become fascinating. Even though we intellectually know that missing most deadlines won't actually kill us, our brains often react as if they might. Deadlines trigger stress responses because they simulate urgency and threat. Evolutionarily speaking, humans are wired to respond quickly to hard limits, especially ones that feel absolute. The word deadline taps into that instinct. It creates a sense of pressure that motivates action, focus, and sometimes even creativity. That's why many people claim they work best under pressure. The looming deadline forces the brain to prioritize, cut distractions, and get things done. However, this same pressure can also backfire. When deadlines feel too rigid or overwhelming, they can cause anxiety, burnout, and paralysis. Instead of motivating action, the fear of crossing the line can make people freeze. In modern workplaces, educators and psychologists often debate whether strict deadlines truly improve performance or simply increase stress. Some environments now use softer language, like target date or milestone, in an attempt to reduce that psychological burden. Yet despite these efforts, the word deadline refuses to disappear. It's too deeply embedded in how we think about time, responsibility, and consequences. What's remarkable is how a word born in violence survived and adapted to peaceful everyday use. Most people who use the word deadline today have no idea about its Civil War origins, yet the emotional echo remains. That subtle sense of danger, that tightening in your chest when the clock is ticking, it's a linguistic ghost from the past. Language has a way of carrying history forward, even when we've forgotten the original story. Every time you rush to meet a deadline, you're unknowingly responding to a term shaped by human conflict, fear, and control. So the next time you hear the word deadline, pause for a moment. Remember that it once meant a literal line you could not cross without dying. Then look at how far the word has traveled, from prison camps to printing presses, from battlefields to boardrooms. Understanding its history doesn't make your tasks disappear, but it can change how you perceive them. That deadline on your calendar isn't a death sentence. It's just a reminder of how powerful words can be and how the past quietly shapes the pressure we feel in the present. Thank you for watching. If you have suggestions for our next video, feel free to share them in the comments below. We'll be sure to give you an acknowledgement for your contribution. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the history of simple things. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories woven through the smallest details.